Geoffrey Canada, welcome to Explorations in Black Leadership.
Thank you.
I know you were only 2 years old when the Brown decision came down in 1954, but when you became known about it and what it promised, what did you think would happen?
Well, you know, this is really fascinating because I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City, and we saw that issue as having to do with being across the Mason-Dixon line. Now, if you ask, were we totally segregated? Absolutely we were. Did I go to schools that were totally segregated? Absolutely. But in my mind, this had nothing to do with me. This was happening someplace else. And it was a while before I started really becoming aware of how significant this was. It was a piece of history that I heard glimmers of, but I think my grandparents, who had come from North Carolina to Harlem and later to the Bronx to get away from the oppression and to try and find work, we thought we were living the good life. I think later on we began to realize that there were real limits, and this major decision was as critical for me and those of us in the North as it was for those people.
Do you remember how old you were when this dawned on you that this affected affected us?
Yeah, I was probably 12 or 13. And in the first part of my life, like a lot of African Americans at that particular point in time, I wasn't necessarily too thrilled being black, right? Being Negro, as we called ourselves. I was very brainwashed by the culture I was living in. And we used to tease one another about having big lips and a big nose and dark skin. And I remember I used to constantly argue with my brothers that, no, I'm yellow, I'm not black, right? And they would be this thing. And that was like almost an insult. And that's the culture that I grew up in. I'll tell you what changed it. I was standing on a corner in the South Bronx, and a couple of people from the Nation of Islam, we didn't even know who these guys were, came and they began to talk to us about being brainwashed. And the older guys sort of, they laughed, they just sort of blew them off. But they started saying things like, have you ever thought about why everything bad is black? And they began to say Black Hat, Black Monday. And I sat there and I said, oh my goodness, there may be something to this. And then it feels like the veils were sort of removed from my eyes. And I began to look around and I said, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And the place that it impacted, I think, in my own consciousness the most was at the schools. I began to look to see what was happening in the schools, and I began to look at a system. I was in sort of the #1 class, and they called it, I was in 4-1 and 5-1, and then the classes went back, and it was all based on what someone thought was your ability. And kids, even in one class behind, so if I was in 6-1, the kids in 6-2, no one thought that those kids would go to college. And they didn't even pretend that they thought. They were hoping they might be able to finish high school. And kids who were in 6-5, no one even thought they could finish high school. And so I sat there and thought, this is not the way other people are living. There are other places in this country, and race seemed to have a primary sort of impact on how people thought about your life expectancy. And suddenly I became very interested in Brown versus Board of Education and what I think it was trying to do, which was not just equalize the, funding and say integration good, but to actually allow African Americans to get an education so that they could improve their lot in life. And that wasn't happening for those of us in the North.
Do you think those kids in 6'2" and 6'3" absorbed this expectation that other people had for them?
It was totally absorbed. I am still, even till this day, absolutely devastated by the generations of young people who believed that they were not going to be successful. So this is, in my family, I'm one of the first ones to go to college. But there were about 4 of us who went to college. I was fine because I was the kind of kid that I was always very gregarious and teachers. The other 3, each one of them were told, my aunt, my brother, and my uncle, each one of them were told that you should not even think about college. And so these were the ones who luckily just sort of somehow fought through that. It doomed almost all those other kids because you internalize, I'm not smart enough. And it made you not want to work hard. It made you not think you could do the work. So you didn't bother studying and you didn't do the homework because you thought, what's the point? Where am I going with this thing? And I think there were generations who were destroyed by that system.